Hello, today I'll be doing a versus video. This time I'll be talking about two albums from some of the biggest names in melodic death metal. And those albums are The Nightmare of Being by At the Gates and Foregone by In Flames. So yeah, of course, with Foregone, this album came out this year, and then with The Nightmare of Being, that came out back in 2021. These are the band's most recent albums. And let's first talk about The Nightmare of Being. So with this album, something you do notice that the band experimented more with their sound. You can definitely hear it within songs like Garden of Cyrus or Cosmic Pessimism, but the At the Gates sound overall is still there. It still feels like At the Gates, and yeah, you can definitely notice that it still feels like At the Gates, especially when you listen to songs like The Paradox or Spectre of Extinction. I mean, this album for me is some of the band's best work, and if you were to make the argument that this is maybe their best album, or at least maybe second place, I wouldn't argue with that. I mean, I do really think this album is that strong. I mean, there isn't really much here, in my opinion, in terms of really any filler. Maybe one or two songs, but that's really it, though. I do think there are some songs on here that are somewhat kind of overlooked or kind of underrated, at least at this point. Some of the songs that come to mind for me when it comes to that are Touched by the White Hands of Death, which is one of my personal favorites on the album, and the album closer, Eternal Winter of Reason, which is one of the shorter tracks on the album. But honestly, the singles on this album are honestly pretty good. Spectre of Extinction, honestly, probably one of my favorite At the Gates songs. Absolutely love that one. Probably one of their best album openers. You also have The Paradox, which was another single. That's also another favorite of mine on the album. Title track is also excellent. You could maybe make the argument with this album that it has a stronger half and maybe a weaker second half, but I'm not sure if I really go that far. I mean, I do probably like the first half more, but the second half does have some pretty killer stuff, though, like The Fall into Time, and again, Eternal Winter of Reason, and Cosmic Pessimism. Cult of Salvation, for me, one of the weaker songs on the album, but I do like it, though. Again, there are no bad songs on here, but all around, I think this is, when it comes to at least their modern work, I think this one is easily the best. I do like it more than At War with Reality and more than To Drink from the Night itself. But yeah, I think this album might rival Slaughter of the Soul for me. I mean, which might be unpopular to say, but again, I really think this album really is that strong. And if you haven't listened to it in a while, definitely give it another listen. Definitely some of the band's best work, in my opinion. And I do think Thomas still sounds strong vocally all these years later, and this album definitely proves it, especially in songs like Spectre of Extinction or The Paradox. But yeah, let's go ahead and move on to Foregone. So with this album, when it comes to what they've been doing for the past 10 or 15 years or so, this album is probably the closest that they've done to doing something that's a return to form. Now, I remember when this album came out, I remember seeing some comments online, social media, YouTube, whatever, or even in interviews, people saying that this album is a return to form. I personally disagree with that. I mean, again, as I mentioned earlier, I do think it's the closest that they've done to a return to form, but I wouldn't say the album is a straight up return to form, though, because there are aspects of this album that do still feel like what they've been doing in the past 10 or 15 years ago. You can definitely hear 2010s In Flames in songs like Bleeding Out and In the Dark and Pure Light of Mind. But of course, you do have some classic In Flames isms in this album, especially in a song like State of Slow Decay or Foregone Part 1. And those two songs are definitely some of my favorites on the album. State of Slow Decay definitely kind of reminds me of Blinded by Fear a little bit, especially the verses of that song. And probably, yeah, again, definitely one of my favorites on the album. And Foregone Part 1, I do like Foregone Part 2, but I definitely like Part 1 more. I really like that song a lot, actually. When it comes to their more modern work, maybe one of the best songs, again, from their later output. And In the Dark, when it comes to the deeper tracks on the album, or deep cuts, In the Dark is definitely one of the standouts for me personally. When it comes to the big anthemic choruses, I think In the Dark definitely has one of the stronger choruses on the album. But then you also have the song Meet Your Maker, which there seems to be a lot of fans that seem to love that song. For me, I'm kind of more towards the middle with that song. I like the verses, I like the heavy aspects or heavy moments within the song, but I'm honestly not that big on the chorus, which might be unpopular to say, but that's all right. We can all have our own opinion. But Be Your Maker, I think, is an okay song, but it's never been one of my favorites on the album personally. But again, if it's one of your favorites, more power to you. Definitely nothing wrong with that. The Great Deceiver is definitely another banger on the album, and another favorite of mine on the album. But I think the album does close on a fairly weak manner with the last three songs, a dialogue in B flat minor, Signature, and the Transmission. I just don't find myself returning to those songs all that much. And for me, some of the weakest material on the album. And again, if you like those songs, more power to you. Definitely nothing wrong with that. But those last three songs just don't really do a whole lot for me. Not bad, but they don't really stand out to me as much as some of the other songs on the album. But yeah, and Bleeding Out, even though it sounds closer to their more modern work than their more classic work from the 90s or early 2000s, still, Bleeding Out, I actually really dig that song, especially Anders' clean vocals in that song. But yeah, overall, a pretty good album. I would say their best since probably Come Clarity or A Sense of Purpose. One of those two albums for me, personally. But yeah, overall, pretty good album. And yeah, there you go. So if I were to choose which album wins for this video, I'd probably go with The Nightmare of Being by At the Gates. And the reason why is because I feel like The Nightmare of Being has less filler, and I feel like the highs on Nightmare of Being are a bit more impressive than the highs on Foregone. At least, well, depending on the track, of course, but I personally find myself getting more out of The Nightmare of Being than Foregone. But again, Foregone still, as I mentioned earlier, pretty good album. But for this video, I gotta go with The Nightmare of Being. But anyways, let me know your thoughts. Let me know which album you like more. Let me know if you agree or disagree with some of the things I said in this video. Let me know some of your favorite or least favorite songs on these albums and all that good stuff. But anyways, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, a like, subscribe. Have a nice day, and take care.